Alright, let's get into this. First off, help wanted. Originally, I was going to do a video on all of the books. I was going to tackle the novels, Fazbear Frights, as well as some of the miscellaneous ones, like the Freddy files and the security logbook. But then I realized that for one video, that would be way too big of an undertaking if I wanted to still have other things come out at a normal pace. And really, I mainly just want to look at the games. That's what's most interesting to me at the moment, especially after Security Breach's DLC came out, which, God, we'll get to that when we get there. So instead, what I'm going to do is I read through all the important parts of the books to understand Help Wanted and Security Breach's lore and where the important bits are. And at some point in the future, I'll make a big video on the books like I was originally going to, on top of including the Tales from the Pizzaplex stuff in there as well. Secondly, I don't know if I'm going to keep this whole setup I have going on here. I don't know if I'm going to move where I'm doing this at. I don't know if I'm going to do any other live action bits in the future. I just figured, why not try it out for the first time? And I figured no better a time than when we're talking about the VR game. It only seems appropriate. Anyway, back to the usual FNAF stuff. The period between UCN and Help Wanted was pretty quiet, all things considered, where people were wondering if UCN was going to be the last mainline FNAF game. On top of that, other indie horror games just weren't as prevalent as they used to be. For instance, Bendy finished releasing all of its chapters, Baldi and Tattletale had their time in the light, but people just moved on, and everyone stopped caring about Hello Neighbor after it released with all the grace of a web fart. I also felt similarly about pretty much all these games. I played them, I had my fun with them, and that was it. I moved on to doing other things. I did play a lot of UCN when that first came out, but it still didn't properly reel me back into FNAF, so the series kind of was in the back burner in my mind, and I was pretty much just back to where I was after Sister Location came out. On top of that, I feel like there wasn't as much talk surrounding the game, good or bad. Even though Help Wanted did a lot of good things, actually, like reeling in new fans, it appealed to current and old fans who fell off the series due to its mix of quality, old and new content, as well as getting reviewed pretty favorably, actually. Within the first month or two of release, it felt like people had just stopped talking about it. It could be due to a number of things, I imagine. The fact that it was only in VR firstly really limited the amount of people who were able to actually experience the game. There wasn't a giant challenge for people to chip away at, which is especially big considering the fact that we had just moved on from the gargantuan 50-20 mode of UCN, and on top of that, the game felt like it was trying to chart a new story for FNAF as a whole, which meant that it was kind of hard for people to theorize about it, which left a lot of theory crafting to the books instead. Despite all of that, though, this was a really big game for me personally. Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted. This cemented me finally getting back into the series and getting fully invested in it in the future. It felt like a big push from the series to get back into the limelight after interest had been declining since around 4 Sister Location, I want to say. Not only was production value way beyond the vast assortment of static images from the previous games that had their charm but were getting stale by UCN, the game also went past the standard FNAF release structure of just showing up one day with at best promotional images on a developer website. Yeah, we got a full teaser trailer for the game that was even shown off for the PSVR. That's pretty sick. On that note, this game was revealed to be a VR game, which was great for me as someone without a headset and $5 in the bank. As you can imagine, didn't have much experience on this one going into it. I watched people play it on YouTube a lot and always thought it looked awesome, which is kind of impressive that watching people play the new game that I couldn't get was what got me interested in the series again, but it took a while until I got my hands on it, and I mean a while, because I first played this game in July of last year. Around my birthday, I finally decided to buckle down and got an Oculus Quest 2, with FNAF VR being my first game I got for the system. I even got it before I got the headset because there was a Steam sale happening at the time. And I've considered doing a little video where I bundle a bunch of smaller VR games together for me to talk about, so maybe I'll talk about the headset on its own at some point, but while we're on it, God, I hate pairing this thing to my computer. I used to use the AirLink because I figured, hey, it's wireless. Gives me a full range of movement to deal with and I don't have to worry about a cord getting in my way. But then at some point, it just figured it'd stop pairing to my computer at all, and it didn't want to connect no matter what I did, so now I had to go and find a cable. A third-party cable, by the way, because the official one is too damn expensive. Man, this is getting a little bit off topic, so bear with me for that, but it felt like at some certain points, every time I turned on the headset, something different went wrong, and it was a real pain for me to deal with. Now, if you're expecting my usual run-through stuff I missed, well, I actually didn't. First FNAF video where I didn't straight up forget stuff I should have added. We did it, boys. That being said, there is one theory I want to mention for Ultimate Custom Night that I recently found out about from a FNAF video made by this guy named Hippie Rat that I'll put in the description since I thought it was really good. Their theory says that in UCN you actually play as Scott Cawthon himself, the one you should not have killed as Dreadbear or Golden Freddy, due to how confusing and ambiguous he made who they're possessed by, a lot of animatronic voice lines referring to the player having created them, and seeing how it's heavily theorized this Hellzone is made by Golden Freddy, it represents Scott being reminded of the many loose ends he never tied up. I really doubt this was intended, but I still think it's an interesting way to read the story. Given how, from what he has said, Scott seemed like he was having a rough time getting the FNAF story down, especially considering he made 6 out of a necessity to tie things up, I think there is a chance he made some things parallel some of the problems he was facing, or regrets he had with how the story went. I think it adds a nice little layer to one of the simpler FNAF stories, and I think it mixes nicely with the story I described last time, with Afton torturing Hell Thing being the in-universe story, with the Scott version giving you a lot of secondary ways to look at things. And that was all I had lined up though, so let's swiftly move on to Help Wanted itself. Now, a FNAF VR game is something that's been in the works for a while, all the way back in the Steam post where Scott seemingly canned FNAF 6. He mentioned a VR title that he'd been working on making a reality, and just slightly under 2 years after that post was made, the game would be released. This is also the first game not solely handled by Scott, with Steel Wool Studios taking the helm on making this under Scott's direction. Now, I hadn't heard about Steel Wool before this came out, as I imagine a lot of others hadn't, but you know, they make games. Yeah, nothing crazy here. The only game that kinda interests me is Bounce, but they did specialize in making VR games, and it's good they got an actual development team to up the scale of this one. I'll be saving the majority of this discussion for Security Breach, but I feel like a lot of people are too hard on Steel Wool, and they seem grateful and passionate about making content for the franchise, which makes me sad when I see people attacking this game and Security Breach purely on the basis that they were made by Steel Wool. Funnily enough, though, that's pretty much it in terms of lead up to release. This was one of FNAF's more standard releases. The game got talked about, got a trailer, and got released when it said it would. There were a couple teasers like the games before, with the highlights probably being the ones with Springtrap and Baby in it, though there is this one teaser that I can't even begin to make out what it is. The effects placed over these images are deplorable. Also, one of these teasers had to be removed because one of the animatronic models might have referenced a fan model, maybe a little too much than they should have. I think the culprit is this teaser that resembles the box art since the model creator said it was a Spring Bonnie model, and also because they were swapped out for Nightmarion when the game was released. Not sure why they made it Spring Bonnie instead of Springtrap anyway, cause he sure ain't in this game. Speaking of which, our game starts with a little ride-through presentation in universe VR, where I will constantly try to grab the handlebar that doesn't exist. This VR game that I'm playing in real life is also a VR game that exists in-universe, in which our player character is put in the position of beta testing. This whole deal was created by Fazbear Entertainment because they're playing into the rumors surrounding the pizza restaurants that were spread thanks to an indie game dev that may or may not be insane. This is a good time to mention my prior FNAF lore knowledge only went as far as UCN, so everything from here on is kind of uncharted territory for me, and I thought they were straight up retconning the prior games, which probably would have been enough for me to throw my hands into the air and say fuck this, but thankfully no, which I'll get into later. After a legal agreement that forfeits my soul to Freddy Fazbear, oh yeah, and the one in-game too, here's the hub area. The place initially is a little stressful feeling, but since this is the only place where you're able to not get killed, it's your only reprieve from hell. There's even a little prize counter, you can't get anything from here yet, but we'll get back to this later. At the main desk, there's this panel showing you all the levels to choose from. There's the first 3 FNAF games, Dark Rooms, Parts and Service, Vent Repair, and Night Terrors, all coming together and make a compilation of remade stuff from past games with some new things thrown on top. There's been a good slew of changes made to the games that were brought back, so let's start things off with FNAF 1. First, I want to start by saying, these games work really good in VR. I handle VR movement pretty good, but even then, if I'm playing a game that has you moving around like a normal video game character for too long and then go back to reality, it feels transcending in the way that I imagine being called to the underworld is. But FNAF games are already built with limited movement in a way that makes it translate very smoothly into VR, feel very comfortable to play, and not make me feel obliterated when playing in long sessions. The first big difference you'll immediately notice is that this is an actual location now. Instead of getting pictures of rooms with pictures of animatronics sometimes moving there, instead there's actually modeled locations with actual animatronics moving through them. This also means you can actually see the animatronics moving now, and man, it's creepy, especially when they're walking right past your door, because these things are gigantic. I feel I should mention, the way you're seeing the gameplay right now is way different from how I see it in VR, because while I can see a little more up and down, which is why stuff unfortunately gets cut off in the recording, sorry about that. I see less on my left and right, and I'm like 3 feet tall, which isn't a great spot to be in when these hulking monstrosities are coming my way. There is a problem with the guys needing to walk from room to room in real space now, and that's that sometimes they'll just disappear from your cameras for a bit. I mean, sure, it is a more realistic camera setup, but it kind of makes it difficult to keep track of them at times, and when I say them, I'm actually referring to Chica specifically. The rest sometimes have a big gap when going from room to room, but Chica sometimes drops off the face of the earth, and that's when I start panicking. I guess it has to do with her having the largest gaps between the rooms she goes to, but a lot of times when she leaves the bathroom hall, I have to hope I'm able to find her again, and I usually only do when she's already at the door. Now, this wouldn't usually matter because I can do the same strategy from the original FNAF 1. Check the door lights for Bonnie and Chica, use the cameras for Foxy and Freddy, clear the thing out with minimal effort required. But there's one problem with that. This game is scary. Look, dude, the early FNAF games have always been about managing your stress, and here I am not managing it well, that's for sure. If I have to deal with these things being within 4 feet of me, I want to at least have a visual on everyone's position at all times. And hey, might as well, considering my cameras are open at all times now. On that note, I imagine probably because of the cameras always being there, the power is really stingy now, so I can only afford to have the doors closed when they explicitly need to be. The going got tough as soon as night 3, and it was only downhill from there, where the bus promptly crashed into a concrete wall once I hit night 5. Night 5 in this game is harder than night 6 in the original. The animatronics are about as active as you'd expect, but Freddy is really out for you. In the original game up to night 4, I could reliably keep him from leaving the show stage, and even when he did on nights 5 and 6, he rarely ever get to the hall corner. Here though, I have to devote all my attention to focusing on him or else he'll gung his way to my doorway, and then my right door is off limits and has to be closed the rest of the night. Getting to 4 AM on night 5 with a good amount of power left is hard enough as it is, so if Freddy gets there too early, it's just a dead game. Funnily enough, despite it being his whole identity, I watch Freddy way more than I watch Foxy in this one, cause it doesn't feel like you can stall him as good here, so by later nights he's guaranteed to run through once or twice. Again though, him banging on my door is more powering. Even further than that, night 5 has a gimmick where if nobody's at your door, everything will start going on and off, and putting aside the power, that's just annoying. With all that being said, I think it's pretty fun actually. For some people it might be overkill, but you gotta understand, in that original video I was playing Mario during the first half of this game. A difficulty increase is good for me. Not only does it up the tension from the original game of not messing up power consumption, the stress of not knowing where the animatronics are adds a new layer of stress that works well for this game in a similar way that it does for FNAF 3. I also can't lie, part of my problems during Night 5 were mostly my fault. I panicked my way through this, draining my power, having doors closed for no reason, and even when the doors and lights were flashing, signaling that nobody was at the doorways, I still kept them closed because I wasn't coping very well. I can't even properly explain why, but this was one of the scariest game sets for me, so I was screwing myself over regularly during this. That being said, I do really like Help Wanted bringing the first game up to the same level of intensity as 2 and 3, and this game's one of the most enhanced by the moving animatronics and feeling the real space around you thanks to the VR. It really highlights how claustrophobic the office in this game is, and to get ahead of myself a little bit, Help Wanted is one of the only games post-FNAF 4 to feel like it harnesses that familiar horror atmosphere of the classic games. Now we're on to FNAF 2. I always liked this one for how speedy the gameplay was, and that's exemplified in this version. Slamming on the mask when danger's staring you right in the face is even more stressful now that it's not just a mouse flick away, and weirdly enough, this one benefits a lot from having two hands to do things with. For me, it meant that I was able to have the mask in my left hand and use the lights and cameras with my right, though that did cause problems for me sometimes. I guess the mask has a pretty big hitbox, because I'd be putting that on accidentally a lot, and when it started happening when I was already having a bad time, I started losing my groove and occasionally my life. Winding the music box also gave me problems at first, because you really need to press down on it or else it won't respond properly. The toys get more attention here too, since the Withered Boys never show up across the main nights. Okay, well, Foxy still appears, but he's a bit of a special case, and even then, before an update they used his FNAF 1 model. Check this out, Night 2's thumbnail has this picture of Withered Foxy, but before the patch, Scarecrow Foxy. That guy looks rough. Also, someone please rip these images, I can't find them isolated anywhere online. Like the first game, it's cool being able to see the animatronics move through the hallway, though I wish you could see them crawling through the vents as well. One of my favorite things in the whole game that they added here is when the puppet gets out of its box. It's super tall, the lighting slightly changes, and you can see it walking at you the whole time. It's on par with the iconic power outage from FNAF 1 for me. There's also a few gameplay adjustments too. Now all the animatronics have a little animation standing in front of you with the mask on, giving some to a few guys that didn't have them. You even get to see Balloon Boy bounding off when you put the mask on. It's pretty silly. Animatronics that attack from the hall work a little differently. They still like sitting around in front of you, but once they're ready to attack, you actually see them start moving towards you. It's pretty creepy, especially since there's no cue for it. You'll be going about your business and start seeing eyes move in the darkness. Didn't think this game would make me freak out at Toy Freddy's goofy ass, but seeing him slowly trudge at me adds a layer of intimidation that wasn't close to anything in the original. On top of that, they also make a great change to how Mangle works. They still come through the vent like they did in the original, but they can also come from the front now too. I really like it, and makes Mangle feel like more of a threat instead of doing what most of the other toys do. The game also doesn't do that thing where you couldn't flash down the hall when someone was moving in, since everyone actually walks in now, so there doesn't need to be a buffer period where the pictures swap. It does mean you sometimes see characters pop into their original poses or Foxy show up out of nowhere, but it doesn't matter that much, it's just kinda goofy. I also noticed there's no battery for the flashlight anymore, which is more of a weird change than anything, but I also think it says something that I didn't even notice the change until I played for a while. I should also mention each of the Night 5s for this game are contained in this black light area of the hub, and because of that each of them come with their own color palettes, which is why FNAF 1 Night 5 was monochrome. This one kinda reminded me of how I said I was sad about how bright the office was in FNAF 2, well, here's that coming back around on me. I can't see anything in here. I mean, the areas the animatronics come from were always giant pitch black voids, but making this area in between extremely dark on top of that, coupled with these dancing lights, gives it this weird uncanny vibe that I dig actually. For a little added footnote to FNAF 2, when the Withered animatronics got added, they also put in this special Withered Night. It's not required to beat the game, but I was enjoying going through FNAF 2, so I figured I'd give it a whirl. An interesting part that I assume is because it's optional is that there's this difficulty slider before you enter where you can make it baby mode or hard as balls, and well, why not? I tried it once, freaked out when Chica decided to pop in front of me out of nowhere, and then Foxy got me a few seconds after I had just gotten rid of him, gave it the old college try. Moving to FNAF 3, unfortunately, it feels like this one got the short end of the stick. I mean, for one, it still does that thing of night 1 having nobody in the building, so it pretty much only gets 4 full nights. Gonna be honest, I don't know why they did this. It's been years since FNAF 3, and I feel like if you have all these other modes with similar office gameplay alongside it with no tutorial night, you could just skip this and giving us a full 5. So why does 3 fall short? To put it simply, it is way too damn easy. It's so funny to see the disparity between the first game being more stressful, the second being faster paced, and then there's 3 where I'm sitting here twiddling my thumbs while Springtrap ping-pongs between 2 rooms. Okay, so first off, for what's changed, the main and vent cameras aren't on the same panel anymore. Instead, there's a monitor for each, and when you switch to one, the other turns off. I'm not sure why they changed this, but it works well enough, and I kinda prefer it for this. The maintenance panel is now firmly on your left at all times. For some reason, you're able to use the panel while using the main cameras at the same time, and I don't know why the other monitors don't turn off while it's rebooting, something like the vent cameras, but it destroys the balance here. Now, at the start of the night, I put the option on reboot all, and whenever something goes out, I slap the button from off-screen with my left hand to avoid looking at Phantom Foxy. I mean, sure, it's funny that it makes me feel like I'm the laziest security guard of all time, but I should not be able to circumvent a core gameplay mechanic like this, especially considering if the video isn't offline, I can still keep track of Springtrap while it's running. While we're on the Phantoms, some of them got reworked. Firstly, the Phantoms had their designs slightly changed, and I won't lie, these versions are growing on me. They more resemble a burnt-up illusion of the animatronics than the murky green originals, though it'd be cool to see this style on the withered animatronics like the original Phantoms instead of the classic models. To rip the band-aid off on this, for some unknown reason, the Phantoms of Chica and the Puppet aren't in this, and I'm not sure why, considering in the original game they did a good job of facilitating not switching between cameras so nonchalantly. On top of that, Phantom Mangle was changed to function exactly like Balloon Boy, just they appear on the vent cameras instead, which feels like Mangle was about to be cut too until someone was like, hold on guys, I have an idea. I somewhat like how Phantom Foxy was redone here. He'll still randomly appear at the left of your office, but now instead of instantly jumping you, if you make sure to not look directly at him, he'll just sit there. I really like the way they kept the mechanic while making it feel more fair, and seeing Foxy primed to attack out of the corner of your eye is pretty scary. I guess the part that makes me feel conflicted is that now it's super easy to dodge all the Phantoms. Coupled with the ease of access to the maintenance panel, it makes things be too in your control. I was always confused by people's dislike of FNAF 3 for being too random, when a degree of randomness is present in all of the original 3, and is part of what makes them work. In FNAF 1, there's a random chance all the animatronics will start moving at you faster, that Bonnie or Chica can stand at your door for too long, both of which drain your power, putting you in a tense situation where you gotta min-max as much as possible. In FNAF 2, the animatronics can coordinate their attacks back-to-back, giving you less time for Foxy and the Puppet, which also puts you in a tough situation trying to get back to a good spot with them. FNAF 3's random chances were that Springtrap could start quickly moving at you while rebooting tasks, and that Foxy could force you to reboot. Since rebooting is extremely easy now, and Foxy is ignorable, there's nothing pushing back at you, meaning I effortlessly got through all the nights without dying once. I'm mainly disappointed because while I gave it its praises in the original video, I've gained a really big appreciation for FNAF 3 since then, to where it's one of my favorite games in the series, so to see it not feel as grand as the other two was a bit sad for me. One last thing before we move on that was really cool to see, instead of being another random visual effect, FNAF 3's Night 5 has the whole building burning down while the night's happening, which is a change so cool I wish it happened in the original game too. The fourth set is the first category that's not based on a specific game, Dark Rooms. This is my least favorite set, not because there's anything super offensive, at least mostly. I just don't care about most of the minigames. The first two minigames are also the same thing, Plush Trap and Nightmare Balloon Boy, both playing out like the Between Night game in FNAF 4. It's exactly the same as in the original, and I'm still just as bad at it here. There's also the Funtime Foxy minigame from Sister Location, for some reason the menu image for the stages of Lolbit. Weirdly enough, this is the only Sister Location minigame to make it in, surprised they didn't repurpose the Funtime Freddy and Baby stuff for parts and service, but like I care, Sister Location sucks, and having to do that number pad in VR would have been enough for me to put down the game. The blacklight versions of these are whatever, okay, besides Funtime Foxy. Plush Trap makes you really small, and Balloon Boy puts balloons in the entire room. Seeing as these are audio recognition tests inside a guessing game, visual effects ain't doing much. I thought the blacklight version of Funtime Foxy was cool. You go against Lolbig instead here, and flashing once to see a million animatronics all over the place is a great way to have your pants shat, and turns the game into Operation with you role-playing as the Tweezers. A pretty cool spin on an old minigame, I will say. I have to talk about them now, don't I? Plush babies, the most infamous part of this game, and at first, I actually kinda like this. The room is pitch black and they'll be showing up all over the place, so you just gotta shine the flashlight on them to make them go away. As the night progresses, more get added, capping out at 3 to keep track of at once. It's pretty fun and has that simplistic FNAF charm to it, but then the blacklight version had to go and destroy all that goodwill. Yup, this is my hell. So the gimmick to this, besides the plush babies being way more aggressive, instead of having plushies of all assortments around the area, now it's plush babies, and the ones you gotta look for are modeled after Scrap Baby. As you can imagine, it's a lot harder for me to actually spot these things, and I swear sometimes I turn the place upside down looking and can't find shit until I'm dead. On top of that, sometimes when I spot them, they instantly teleport somewhere else, like what the hell is that about? And to make matters weirder, occasionally I'd shine my light on somewhere that didn't look like any plush was, and I'd get rid of somebody. Are they invisible, or am I just missing something? I'll talk about this later, but this game has a non-VR version that uses the same save data as the VR file, and I got so fed up I switched to that one for a bit to get it done, where I dealt with pretty much the same problems I did in VR, and it took nearly 2 hours. This is only one of 2 times I switched to flat mode for a level, but yeah, this sucked. It's really funny to me how Sister Location's Night 4 is widely considered to be the most frustrating challenge in one of these games. Shall I introduce you to this? Now I need a pick-me-up, and thankfully this is one of the best things Help Wanted has to its name. These are the parts and service minigames where you're tasked with fixing up the multitudes of things wrong with the original animatronics. It really puts into perspective how big these guys are, having to get all up close and personal with them while hoping nothing goes wrong. Well, not much can go wrong here actually, so long as you follow instructions and take your time you won't die. And while the easy difficulty is probably the thing most holding these parts back, I don't really care because I think they're neat. It's cool to get a look at the inner workings of the animatronics, and while they start out a bit too simple, they definitely get better as you go. Bonnie's a nice introduction with fixing his eyes and retuning his guitar. Chica's probably the lamest because you barely have to do anything that important until needing to grab her cupcake at the end. And even that's pretty much what happens with Bon Bon and Sister Location. Freddy's pretty good though, you gotta take random objects out of him while making sure not to bump any of his sensitive bits. It's topped off by putting his music box back in, since even though he's staring at you with death in his eyes, if you don't take your time you'll automatically drop the thing on the floor and probably die. As you can imagine, he wasn't very pleased that I slammed his music box on the floor, and I started panicking, which only got worse as I proceeded to not take my time and drop every damn music box on the floor. Finally, there's Foxy's, where you need to scrounge around to find the servos that go in the proper parts of his body while making sure you don't put it in while he's moving. It's probably second best in terms of taking advantage of the VR form, and besides the fact that I'm just happy to be able to rummage around the robots, it's also nice that it offers something a little different. I was hoping the blacklight levels would add something a little extra in the difficulty category, but for the most part, not really. Bonnie and Chica's levels are just visual filters that make things a bit harder to see. Freddy's pretty much the same aside from these asshole freckles going on your face sometimes, and Foxy's the best one. Aside from Me Like Fire, the fuses constantly change color before you place them in, so not only do you need to spend extra attention seeing which one switches to the combo you need, you also got a time placing it in. It was a cool spin that added a little more depth, and I wish the other levels got something similar. It would have been cool if maybe for the blacklight levels you could instead be doing repairs on the withered animatronics, which would hit similar beats but with a few new tasks to do that are more difficult and precise. Either way though, one of my favorite parts of the game, it's a fun time. Similarly, we have vent repairing. If you're claustrophobic, avert your eyes. And that's that it looks less claustrophobic than it is. In VR, my face is practically pressed up to these vents. The first stage up is Mangle. You have to do these little mini-games at each vent, but once a vent opens, it stays open, giving Mangle another route to get to you, meaning you have to constantly check all 3 sides while doing your tasks to scare them away with the light. I got stuck here for a few attempts because I was dumb and didn't realize the pipes blowing steam at me was something that had to be fixed. Yeah, my bad. This is fun, fun, but the blacklight version is a lot cooler. All the vents start open, and on top of that you're being hunted by Mangle and a second Shadow Mangle, which means you gotta act quick and multitask real good to get everything done, which ain't easy because the visual filter makes the red and yellow buttons on this one blend in. I had a really bad instance where I turned around right as Mangle was about to get me. Didn't feel like going in after that one. I did anyway though, it was fun. Unfortunately, there's only 2 vent repair levels for some reason, and we end things off with Ennard, who's definitely a lot more involved. You start by having to push whichever button has its breaker lit up by following the wires, then you gotta do this puzzle swapping around gears to collect other gears that you use to finish the final set, and then doing one of these pipe puzzles while everything explodes. It's funny because similar to Parts and Service, as long as you follow directions and keep a cool head about things, you'll be fine, but Ennard's always lurking around just to up your anxiety as much as possible. It especially messes me up when he's looking directly at you while placing the gears in, mainly cause I'm not totally sure if he can do anything, but either way I don't want to place my hands near that man. The blacklight version makes things even worse. Apart from making you do everything upside down, there's things all over the place. It gets really weird seeing a bunch of stuff from all the games being thrown around randomly. They even swap out Ennard for Springtrap in one of the button sections. They're just decorations, but there definitely were a few times I got scared when I was taking a trip down the elevator and started seeing stuff looking back at me. Especially when you have to grab the tape out of Nightmare Fredbear's mouth. Yeah, that was uncomfortable. Speaking of Nightmare Fredbear and being uncomfortable, the last game mode we have to talk about is Night Terrors. This is basically a remixed version of the FNAF 4 gameplay, with one exception, that being this extremely simple level against Baby. All you do is shut the doors when she looks at you, wait a bit, don't wait too long or the plushies kill you, rinse and repeat until 6 a.m. It's literally a game of peekaboo against the character named Baby, no less. I see you, Steelwool. So FNAF 4 was already a pretty scary game for me, with its reliance on audio cues, higher difficulty, and exemplification of fear of the unknown using pitch black spaces, which created a very anxiety-inducing experience. So how do you think doing that in VR went for me? I'll tell you, not well. I was using every ounce of my concentration to get to the end of these, and I deliberately left them for last because I knew this was gonna be rough. It intensifies that feeling of being in a dark room of your house being hunted. No matter where I am, I'm staring into the void, and I gotta hope the void isn't staring back. The worst part is, I feel like kind of an idiot for being constantly on edge because these stages are way easier than the originals. A sick, twisted part of my brain wants to see how an actual FNAF 4 night would play out in VR, even though I know for a fact seeing Foxy in the closet would have me on the floor, and one mistake that led to death would make me turn the game off. Anyway, why is this easier than FNAF 4? Well, cause a lot of the processes going on here have been completely neutered. Let's start with Funtime Freddy. You can easily clear him out by going to a door, holding it closed, looking behind you to flash bong it and make her go away. Once she is gone, flash the hallway and then move to the opposite door and repeat. The only wrench in the plan is around 4 when he goes into the closet, but even then all you do is run over and shut it, then it's business as usual. Hell, if your luck is good, you don't even need to do that, cause Funtime is very prone to a glitch where his brain shuts down at the other end of the hall and he stays there for the whole night. I can even illustrate this with the stage against Nightmarion. Run to a door, look down the hallway without the flashlight to try and find their eyes. If they aren't there, run to the other door and check. If they are, keep it shut. Once you do shut a door, flash the tentacles that make a weirdly very wet sound. Once you get into a rhythm, keep shutting them off when the eyes are there, make the tentacles go away when you have free time. So what's missing from this that was in 4? Well, a couple things. Firstly, there's nothing that increases the difficulty by taking your attention away from the hallways. The closet is only used by Funtime Freddy once, and the bed isn't used by either of them, although Nightmarion's tentacles can take a little time out of your hands, but not enough to be a real problem. Because of this, you can focus your attention on where the one main threat is coming from without much of anything to throw a wrench into the plan. Next, no audio cues. Well, okay, Funtime Freddy does have specific voice lines when things happen, but you can easily get through the night without paying attention to that, and I know this because I beat it and have no clue what voice lines correspond to what action. What I mainly mean about no audio cues is that no breathing at the door when it's time to close it. With Funtime Freddy, you always shut it as soon as you get there, and with Nightmare, you can see their eyes towering over you, which I will give credit is a pretty freaky visual. There's no audio cues because hallway behavior has been simplified. Originally, you have to make sure there's no breathing before you were clear to flash the hall. What kept you from closing the door every time is that if they were at the other end of the hall, closing the door would invite them right in. This isn't the case here, since not only does closing the door always work on Funtime Freddy, there's no reason to flash Nightmarian since you can always see them. That's the reason why everything is so easy and the door works as a catch-all for every threat. The system's in place to prevent you from doing that in the original were straight up removed. This might have something to do with the fact the animatronics actively walk at you in this game, I'm not sure. Regardless, even though these changes are very good for my heart rate, it is still a bit sad to see a lot of what made 4's game loop interesting be simplified to such a degree. I also specifically avoided mentioning the last stage against Nightmare Fredbear because, funnily enough, he works almost exactly as he did in his original boss fight, with a couple differences. Unlike in the original, shining the light on him in the hallway doesn't cause him to instantly kill you, instead it makes him start running at you, and if you flash him multiple times, he can sometimes teleport straight to the doorway. Like Nightmarian, you're encouraged to not look for him using the light and instead seeing his eyes moving at you, but if you feel like playing things a little risky, after you block him with the door, you can blink the flashlight down the hall and that'll sometimes make Fredbear show up again, and with some luck you can loop him like this. That being said, you'll need some luck anyway, cause god. Okay, so Fredbear still laughs to signal he's on the bed or in the closet, and in this version, there aren't even any fake-out laughs like could happen in the original. Checking him on the bed is easy, it's the closet that causes a problem, cause there's a glitch where if he goes into the closet, he'll sometimes just kill you. I was actually having a pretty simple time with this stage, cause I just repeated my FNAF 4 strategy with a few mix-ups and it worked good, but every time he laughed, it was a coin flip on if the run was dead or not. Honest to God, it made me go from having a panic attack to laughing my ass off. The whole reason this game was so stressful is because you'd see your mistakes lead to other mistakes and watch everything fall apart culminating in the jump scare, but with it out of your hands, especially with you being killed at such a consistent time, it was a joke and a pretty funny one. I imagine it didn't help that some friends were watching me play this and it turned into a betting game of, is he gonna kill me this time? And the answer was always yes. This was the other time I switched to flat mode for a level because I figured might as well speed up the process until I get the magical run where I don't die. Let me just say, yeah, this sent me crashing back down to reality cause Jesus Christ. So flat mode is a good bit brighter than VR, again I'll get into it, and sometimes that lets you see into pitch black spaces. Because of that, you can see Nightmare Fredbear chilling by the doorway, and yeah, I shat my pants. It's so sad that this probably wasn't even intentional, cause this is some actually good horror that hit me harder than 90% of jump scares across the whole series. Moving into position, going to look at the hall, only you see this giant thing staring back, no glowing eyes and no movement, just standing there waiting to see what you'll do with no accompanying audio cue or stinger sound. While it did make things easier, because I could tell when I had to close the door more often, it was definitely a lot more unsettling, so I'd say it was worth it. Oh yeah, and on my first try on flat mode when I went into the closet I lived, so thank God for that. There's no blacklight versions of Night Terrors, instead once you beat everything in the game, you get access to the final level, Pizza Party. It's this weird maze of a bunch of rooms and doors with stuff from all the games with occasional animatronics to avoid. Once you get to the end, there's this weird-looking rabbit, and following him has you be Freddy on stage now, finally. The credits roll with you standing here and the rabbit prancing around, so what was all that about? Well, now's where I get to start talking about story stuff, so strap in for that. To be able to get the story in the first place, you need to run around collecting tapes. These are in the levels, and they range from having to open a drawer in the FNAF 1 office to this really annoying one where you have to make your way to the left wall of the Funtime Foxy stage. Yeah, I didn't like that one. You also need to actually get the tape player from the prize counter by hitting it with a basketball. While we're here, you'll notice a lot of stuff blocked off by coins. Well, Faz tokens are a secondary collectible you can get for the sake of unlocking stuff in the prize counter and not much else. There's other stuff you can get without coins that you instead unlock through this gift box at the end of every level. The prizes you get are random, there's more prizes than there are levels, and there's a chance you'll get a plush trap jump scare instead of a prize, which dicked me over quite a few times. So if you really really want to fill out everything here, be prepared to grind the parts and service levels. Me personally, I wasn't leaving here without all the achievements, so I had fun wasting my time with this. The tapes are where you get pretty much all the story from, though there are parts that were explained by FNAF AR as well, that are thankfully organized online because I don't want to play that game. There's 16 tapes in total that follow the developer of this game, with the tapes also strangely being out of order. Nobody seems to have agreed upon a correct order for these things, so I'll just talk about them in the order that makes sense to me, and whenever I'm talking about game development stuff, just know I'm talking about the development of the in-universe FNAF VR, unless Steelwool had to fight off demonic malware in real life too, who knows. So as the story goes, a game developer labeled as Tape Girl, I love consistent naming schemes, was working on the game until she started to find a virus lurking around, and it wasn't the usual sort either, as while she was testing for the game, she started to see this weird character she'd never seen before, and even weirder, it wasn't trying to attack her, it was just watching her in the background. Later on, the virus started attaching itself to her tapes, so in an effort to make sure that this thing can't cause any more problems, she scatters the tapes across the game and warns to make sure that nobody ever collects all of them and brings them together. And at this point, it's a little late for that, so we're just gonna have to ride this one out. While all of this is going on in the game, the development team itself ain't doing too great, mainly surrounding this one employee named Jeremy. That's like the third Jeremy in this series. There's this one, the guard from FNAF 2, and one of the dead kids in 6. There's a lot of names out there, Scott, come on. He was the first to notice that something was wrong, but when he went to go tell his bosses was in the middle of doing something else, so he basically got ignored, which isn't too great, considering he had a very nasty run-in with this thing. The tape girl mentions him acting strangely, complaining about horrible nightmares, and talking to somebody who isn't even there. And this all culminates in the fact that when they're getting ready to fire Jeremy, while the tape girl doesn't realize what she saw, she walks in on Jeremy cutting his face off with a guillotine paper slicer Jesus. We also find out the company making the game is about as shady as you expect someone affiliated with Freddy's to be, considering they have their employees scan in objects to be used in the game development process, which FNAF AR clarifies as animatronic parts, which, first off, how does that even work? How do you scan items into the game? Like, assuming that you could somehow do some magic where you're able to salvage the actual data on the animatronic bits. I know for a fact that they were not able to do that with the animatronic part that they needed, and why am I saying that? Well, considering the form that the thing manifests into, am I wrong in assuming that the animatronic bit that they salvaged is Springtrap? And if that's the case, they would have had to salvage the animatronic parts from the burnt down FNAF 6 location, which is... how did you do that? How does that work? I didn't mention this in the original in-person recording, but when they said scan things in, I was under the impression of getting the data off of the actual circuit boards and stuff. But now I'm realizing there's always the potential it could have been Remnant or something, which just kind of drives home that Remnant is a very unneeded concept that seems like the cure-all for whatever happens in the story that we can't properly explain. I mean, since it seems to let souls possessing animate objects, I guess it maybe makes sense that it's allowing William Afton's soul from inside of Scraptrap to be able to go into the game, but there's not a lot of evidence for that since everything revolving around whatever scanning things into the game means and the boards used to do so goes relatively unexplained throughout the entire game, even though it's the thing I'm most curious about, since they don't go very in-depth with it, despite it being the fact that the main antagonist of the game is present at all, so... yeah, Remnant sucks. So, yeah, that's basically what I'm getting down to. I don't like the concept of Remnant. I already kind of touched on it in the past video, but I'm just ripping the band-aid off here now. Might talk about me not liking it later once we get to Security Breach. I don't know, because I don't know how much Remnant plays a factor into that game, and I'm hoping it's little. Furthermore, I'm gonna be honest, scanning in real-life objects to be used to expedite the game development process only for things to go horribly wrong, sounds like some creepypasta parody type shit. Like, hey, making the AI for Epic Mickey is too difficult, so he put some poor sap soul inside a Peatronic or whatever. The final bit of all of this, though, is that the indie game developer who made the in-universe versions of the FNAF games was actually contracted by Fazbear Entertainment to make these games as a way of delegitimizing what actually took place, which basically, imagine if Five Nights at Chuck E. Cheese was based on real-life events. Now, that's fucked up, but in a world where Fazbear Frights exists, not that far off from what's to be expected, honestly. While they do a good job of explaining why it's relevant, and it is good at painting Fazbear Entertainment as this truly horrible and scummy company, I'm gonna be honest, I don't know why this had to be a factor at all. All it does is overcomplicate things by having in-universe versions of real-life FNAF games, and the only good thing it really explains is why enough people are still going to these locations for there to be a giant Freddy mall in the next one. Even that excuse doesn't check out, though, because people were still going to locations like the FNAF 1 location, Circus Babies, Fazbear Frights, and the FNAF 6 place way after incidents happened like the missing children's incident, the Bite of 87, burning down of Fazbear Frights, and the FNAF 6 place. So I don't feel like this is something that really needed to be justified, considering it was pretty much just accepted at this point. Either way, like the tape girl says, collecting the tapes starts summoning the virus that manifests as this weird Spring Bonnie looking guy. I like how you don't immediately know what the deal with him is. You just start collecting tapes and he starts showing up in the doorway of the hub, either waving or staring at you, getting closer the more tapes you collect. He is just like the tapes say, though. All he does is stand there watching, and you can do unspeakable things. We all have moments of weakness. This guy's known as Glitch Trap, although he did go by Malhair for a second, and I am really sad that Glitch Trap rolls off the tongue better, because Malhair is a much cooler name. Now, similar to the prior games, this one has multiple endings. In the last tape, the girl mentions how to kill this thing.
Let it begin to merge with you. Play the music and flip the switch. That will cause a hard restart of the game and flush the memory, effectively killing it.
Prepare to merge by flipping the switch and playing music. Well, message sent and received. Playing the last tape and backing out has him standing behind the monitor, hit all the buttons on the table, and flick the black light lever, and you end up trapped in this little area. Glitch Trap looks at you, tells you to shut up, and then the game ends. Yeah, this is another sister location situation where there are two endings, both of which end badly. Of the two, All Tapes is the canon ending, and this has Glitch Trap going into the mind of the player like it did to Jeremy. It's not super clear that's what's happening when you're trapped, but if you don't do the combo fast enough, your POV switches to Glitch Trap and you die, so it's a little more obvious there. We don't figure out what this means here, but thankfully we don't need outside assistance, cause this isn't the end of things for Help Wanted. Yeah, Help Wanted has some DLC to its name. This was also a fair bit bigger considering it was marketed like a full-on expansion rather than an update like the other FNAF DLCs. Unlike the previous FNAF games that got extra content, however, you actually gotta pay for this one. Don't worry, it's not unreasonable or anything, it's just $10 and you can usually find it for half of that on a lot of Steam sales, which is a pretty good price considering, to get ahead of myself a bit, it adds a pretty decent amount of quality content. Right off the bat, I love the aesthetic of this. It's themed around classic Halloween traditions and movies. The Frankenstein shtick of the new guy is pretty obvious, but now levels take place in areas like mansions, pumpkin patches, and corn mazes. The game completion area is in a barn. It's really cool. It especially stands out since FNAF games primarily specialize in closed-in areas, so having a lot of open-air environments is a nice and much-needed change of pace. On top of that, for the most part, all the new minigames have animatronics animatronics that weren't in the base game. Aside from Nightmare, Mangle, and Nightmare, all the FNAF 4 guys show up here. This was the first major appearance of the Withered guys, and there's even a few completely new animatronics. The first are the Plushkins, very lame way of starting this. They're plush babies wearing Halloween masks of the animatronics. They remind me of the Jacko Goombas from Mario Galaxy, and that's all I have to say about them. The other animatronics are cool though. Obviously the star of the show is Dreadbear himself. I think a lot of the ways they use him are cool, but on his own, yeah, he's neat. The last one is Grim Foxy. Not sure why he's called that since he's basically Jacko Foxy, but this name's definitely a lot cooler. I'm not sure if I've turned around on the Jacko guys since I talked about 4, but Grim Foxy's pretty cool to me, and I even like seeing Jacko, Bonnie, and Chica more here, which might have something to do with them leaning more into the fire aesthetic for them. I like fire. Also, while we're here, since I didn't have a good time to talk about it earlier, I figure I should talk about Glitch Trap themselves too, and I really like them. It harnesses the other big fear children entertainment establishments have going for them, the most god-awful mascot costumes you've ever seen. I'm surprised they didn't tap into this earlier, since it kinda goes hand in hand with weird-looking animatronics for me, and especially since they have just as much material to work with. Have you seen the old Disney mascot costumes? They're almost worse than the robots. Glitch Trap has a lot of that subtle, creepy design I like from the classic animatronics, and the way that I can see where some of the appeal for kids is, but it has just enough unnerving features to not be all good. The weirdly human body contrasting with the extremely cartoony head, the giant eyes that are especially accentuated when you're in blacklight mode, the very visible stitching that breaks the illusion the costume's supposed to provide, and the whole thing looking grody as hell. It's impressive that it feels like they understood a lot of what worked for the original animatronic designs and translated that into a mascot costume, while also harnessing what makes them creepy specifically without going overboard. Very solid design here. There's a total of 7 new minigames and 3 fleshed out nights for an 8th mode, so let's start out our fun and exciting new content with Plushkin Patch. Yup, this sucks. It's another round of plush babies, which is about as riveting as it sounds. Thankfully there's no blacklight version, because for some reason, despite there being a Switch, there's no blacklight versions of anything here. Was this meant to be used? Because having it here at all is a bit weird. Now for something actually fun, Pirate Ride. This is so nice. It's just a feel-good time emulating one of those moving shooting gallery rides, but it's themed around Foxy's pirate adventures. He even got a new costume. You just try and get as high of a score as possible. The only way you can die normally is if you get an embarrassingly low score. Though if you want high risk, high reward, there are these alternate pathways you can take. You have to outmaneuver Jacko, Bonnie, and Chica, but in exchange you get a lot more points. I really like this one for giving a little more of a view into the kids' entertainment side of the animatronics rather than the usual murder stuff, to the point where I would have really liked to see at least one more minigame in a similar style. To completely contrast this, Hallway. Good God. This is an extremely simple one, but one of the most tense in the whole game. It's a giant hallway where you're surrounded on all 4 sides. Bonnie and Chica come from the sides, making you wait before passing by, and Foxy is always in front of you. If he's there when the lightning flashes and he catches you moving, he'll zoom at you. There's some slight leeway with it, but sometimes the lightning flashes twice quickly, and it always seems like as soon as I register it has some give, I get killed for it. Once you get a certain way, Freddy then shows up behind you, so at that point you can't afford to be stopped for too long. It kinda reminds me of Slaughter Me Street if it was fun. Seeing Foxy randomly appear in front of you is like a small jump scare in of itself, and that's not to mention when he runs at you when you're moving. The harsh red lighting on Bonnie and Chica when they step out of the doors, hearing the screeching noises get louder as Freddy closes in on you. They did the atmosphere extremely good here. Build a Mangle is probably my second least favorite of the DLC, though that also probably has to do with me being bad at it. You have to get animatronic parts off this track, but I swear to God, as soon as I process what piece I need to get and find it on the track, the TV changes what parts I need to grab, and if you put in 3 wrong pieces, Mangle has enough of you being bad at video games and tells you to stop. There's also these Freggles on the track that you shock and toss, and I hate these guys. They can't kill you, but them crawling on my face is very uncomfortable. I only kind of understand how Trick or Treat works, so from what I get, you have to look through the windows and take note of where everyone is. If you can't find one of them, or if you see a character move towards the door and never move away, then put on the mask for that character. Once the door opens, you hope and pray you got it right. I'm not completely sure if this is how it works, because first off, all 3 rounds when I played it, Foxy was at the door, so that was kind of funny. And also on some rounds, I feel like there are other animatronics I couldn't find, but it ends up not being them. I think this game is pretty interesting conceptually, but I don't know, I feel like I still don't get it yet. Dreadbear, this one's awesome. It's essentially a new parts and service stage, and after playing it for the first time, yeah, it's my new favorite. It's more involved than just follow directions and you'll live, which is what I liked about Freddy and especially Foxy stages. But where Dreadbear's improves is in the complexity. There's a brain in front of you with 3 tasks you gotta get done. Paint each section of it in accordance to what's on the TV, change the brain size to match the TV's number, and match its wavelength to the red one on the screen. On top of this, you have to be pretty quick, since after some time the power goes out and you can only reboot the power 3 times before it's game over. I also like how to compensate for the added speed, they let you make a lot more mistakes, when in the original parts and service levels, sometimes it felt like if you slightly bump the wrong thing, you get killed for it. You can color the brain wrong, go over or under the size, and mess with the wavelength and knobs as much as you'd like, just make sure you get it done in time. I actually had a little bit of trouble with the wavelength stuff, I kept getting the size right without realizing you match the wave speed too. Once you're done, you slam dunk the brain in his head, and if you got everything right, he gets hauled away. This was one of the highlights for me and makes the parts and service of gameplay a lot more fun and interesting instead of the enjoyment coming from me getting to touch Freddy Fazbear or whatever. There's also one fully fleshed out minigame, that being Danger Keep Out. It's a new spin on FNAF 1's gameplay where instead of doors to protect yourself, you use light flashes that reset the animatronics' positions. Once they do get to your doors, they'll bang on it a couple times, giving you a few seconds to hit the door flash, but if they get 3 bangs in, that's death. Bonnie and Chico work relatively the same, although they feel faster, and I also get a bit annoyed with them since you have to see their fire flaring up or else the flash doesn't work. Foxy's pretty much the same, you now have to check on him a bit more frequently and flash him to make him go back home, and Dreadbear goes a similar route to Freddy, with you need to flash him to stun him and try to hold him off until the night's over, cause he can break down your doors instantly. Each flash takes 20%, once you're out of juice you have to flick the lever to shut down the entire power, which makes you a sitting duck until it's back online. And the power seems to come back faster if you reset it before you used all your flashes. So in some cases, if everyone's been taken care of, it's more beneficial to reset early so you don't have to wait as long later. It's a really interesting spin on the traditional FNAF 1 gameplay, although now that finding them on the cameras is how you fend them off, it really highlights how sometimes they just disappear, which now can pose a real problem since I can't just wait to see if I find them at my doors like in the original FNAF 1, cause if they start banging, it all goes downhill. Overall, though, it's a cool shake-up on the original formula, I just prefer FNAF 1, although it would be cool to see the game recreated in Click Team and styled like the first game. There's a free fan game idea for you. Last one up is Corn Maze. I did all this one in flat mode and I'll explain why later. So you're in this huge maze with Grim Foxy running around and need to find one of 4 keys. Once you do, go to the gate with the same color as the key you collected and you're golden. The whole time, Foxy's hunting after you and you can hide from him using the cardboard cutouts spread around. I like how there's a bit of risk-reward to it. If you get in before Foxy spots you, you have a lot more leeway in your timing, but Foxy will still be moseying around near you once you get out. Alternatively though, if you get in right as Foxy sees you and you hear the audio cue, he'll chase after you, giving you less time to get in the cutout, but once you do, he'll despawn, giving you more time. It makes for a nice little balance. There's also these crows on the ground. I originally figured they'd alert Foxy of where you are, but literally nobody mentions it online, not even the FNAF wiki, so I guess they're just here to mess with you. And if that's the case, it worked, cause they're way louder than like anything else in the game for some reason. You might be thinking, this whole thing seems pretty simple, so what was so bad you had to do it in flat mode? Well, there's a secret little challenge for you to do. If you collect all 4 keys in one rung, a secret 5th key spawns. Get that one and you can make your way back to the center of the maze where you began to open this trap door. This is where things got really frustrating. I spent like an hour and a half chipping away at this and it made me notice a lot more of the cracks. Like sometimes there's prolonged areas with no cutouts, so if Foxy spots you here you're just screwed. Or how Foxy's trying his best to stay in the maze but can't manage it sometimes and ends up blipping out of reality. I wasn't recording this part so you'll have to take my word for it, but I had a time where Foxy tried to run in front of me, couldn't because it was a dead end, and instead clip through the ground and respawn behind me, instantly killing me. I know that sounds far-fetched and insane, but please trust me on this. Anyway, after being bad at video games for way longer than necessary, I got everything I needed, ran back to the trapdoor, and my prize is this weird white rabbit mask. Remember when people thought this was going to be acting? I now know one way the story could have gotten worse. After you put it on, the game boots you back to the title screen and you can now see it chilling by the prize counter. If you grab the glitch trap plush you get for getting the all tapes ending while wearing the mask, you start hearing things from a girl talking about something she made, nobody suspecting a thing, and generally being ready to get down to business. That's not the only setup going on here, as in the flat mode update, the staff door at the end of Pizza Party is open, showing a construction site with a giant billboard advertising a new Freddy's location coming soon. I know I said in my first FNAF video that I was going to take the story one game at a time, and I've stuck true to that and still want to, but let me simplify a couple things and indulge myself while we're at it. So first off, the main character of this game isn't some nameless nobody. We play as a girl named Vanessa, who should ring a bell, and she's pretty important nowadays. But as for right now, FNAF AR says she works at the game development studio. She has a glitch trap mess with her mind similar to Jeremy, but instead of offing herself, she starts fashioning her own bunny costume and go do inadvisable things in, which is what the white mask is about. Secondly, the building under construction here is the one and only Pizzaplex seen in Security Breach, and this is such a cool way to tease the new game. It's very quiet when you enter, just some ambient noise, snowy trees, and a house behind you letting you take in the site, which was even more exciting before Security Breach came out because we didn't know what in God's name this was going to be. The only thing I can compare it to is the Springtrap teaser and sister location and how much better this is in comparison to that. The Springtrap teaser just created more questions than answers and primarily worked off shock value, and so once that shock dissipated, all it did for me personally was make me wonder what the significance of it was and dread how it would mess up story beats, mainly those from FNAF 3. This one works as being an actual teaser. It's surprising, it's exciting, it builds hype, and it got people speculating, which I guess Springtrap did too, but this is more can't wait for the next game and less what are you doing? With all the work Help Wongig was doing establishing a new era of the franchise, this cemented it, giving us thrilling and foreboding signs of things to come. While that would have been a perfect line to end the video on, we've still got a fair bit more to talk about, notably the non-VR version of the game. This came out in December of 2019, 7 months after the original game came out. While it did reinvigorate interest in the game for some people, part of me wants to say it might have been better to wait the few months until non-VR was ready, since I feel having an alternative for people without a headset would have given the game more staying power. Like, I don't think it's impossible to imagine that some people without a headset might have lost interest by the time flat mode came out, but I don't know anything about video game marketing and it doesn't really matter now, so who cares? FNAF Not So VR has a lot of interesting small differences that make it a good and accurate experience for someone who doesn't feel like spending large amounts of money, but also makes it a step below the standard version of the game. You can notice the biggest change right at the title screen, and that's how much brighter this version is, which I feel mostly kills a lot of the atmosphere that was originally present. The hub is actually a good example of this. It was dark enough to be slightly unsettling even without any danger, but now it's too lit up to keep that intimidation factor. Also, funny little fun fact, the way you select from menus, be it options at the title or the minigames you play, has you move your view around and select menu items by looking at it and clicking. I liken it to needing to whack the menu option with an invisible melee weapon. One problem with this though is that melee weapons don't have infinite range, which means sometimes it's a bit tricky to hit things. This typically doesn't affect the main game, although when it does, you gotta get a little more precise when hitting things than I'd like, but it does mean that you aren't close enough to change the mouse sensitivity option on the title screen, so the only way to change the sensitivity of your mouse is to plug in a controller and change it that way, which is very ironic, or alternatively, you could change the sensitivity through your computer options, and all this isn't helped by the base sensitivity being very low in-game. As for the games themselves, FNAF 1 through 3, Dark Rooms, and Night Terrors are pretty much the same, other than the bright threatened areas really hurting night terrors and it being even harder to piss off Phantom Foxy now. These are basically their original forms now, and I have the same thoughts for each of them, with 1 still being an improvement and 3 being a downgrade. Though I will say Plush Baby does feel very natural on a mouse and keyboard, probably because it's the new mode that feels closest to the classic FNAF stuff. It's mainly parts and service and vent repair that suffers. The physicality of it is completely lost, which not only highlights how simple Bonnie and Chica's levels are, it also really harms Freddy and Foxy's levels. The main difficulty in these was timing, grabbing, or putting in items, like taking out various things while avoiding Freddy's safety latch, or putting fuses in Foxy once he stops moving. Now that actions like these are done in a single click, it completely destroys it. Wait for the latch to be out of the way, and click. Wait for Foxy to stop moving, and click. There's no franticness of moving fast once you get the opportunity, and hoping you don't mess it up. It's still good, but definitely not as good as the VR versions. It's only a step above the parts and service stuff in Sister Location. Lack of physicality also harms vent repair. Ennard still works completely fine, even if I think it isn't as fun if you ask me, but Mangle isn't as good without having to actually swivel around to check all the vent openings. Flat mode also highlights how lame the jump scares are. I could forgive it in VR because them waving around in front of you got the job done, and I imagine it might be harder to pose jump scares for the VR, though maybe that's wrong given how much better they look in Help Wanted 2. But in flat mode, some of them look like those flailing tube men flapping around in your face. While we're on it, ironically, some of the jump scares actually suffer from being in VR, notably Classic Freddy and Babies. I swear your head clips through theirs by the end of them. Funnily enough, I feel the exact opposite way about these as I do the ones in UCN. The jump scares with less movement end up being the better ones, like Funtime Foxy, Classic Chica, Toy Ennard, and Toy Ennard? What the fuck am I talking about? These guys don't move around in your face as much, but I feel like because of that, they look a lot better. Also, it has misplacing jump scare sounds in common with UCN. I know this is nitpicky, but it really bothers me. Funtime Foxy, Lolbig, and Funtime Freddy use the FNAF 4 sound, and Baby's Closet jump scare uses the FNAF 1 sound, which is really sad because it looks cool. Overall, for flat mode though, it's fine. I'd say if you're only gonna play this version, it's still worth it to buy it, and it's still one of the best games in the series. It's just sad that the only way to experience the definitive version of the game is shelling out a minimum of $300 for a pair of funny looking goggles. Now that was originally going to be it for this video, but recently a fan game has been getting around that fully recreates Ultimate Custom Night in VR, and I figured I already talked about UCN, and I'm talking about VR stuff right now, so it was a good time to discuss it, so let's take a quick little look at UCN VR while I'm here. The first fan game on the channel. Not surprised it's FNAF, but I am surprised it's this one. I figured if I started with any, it'd be with Five Nights at Candy's, but anyway. This game comes to us courtesy of one Euro, who seems to specialize in taking FNAF stuff and putting it in VR. They make versions of FNAF 4 and 6, Sister Location VR before Help Wanted 2's announcement kind of put a damper on that, and even Grizzlies VR. It is going to be a very interesting day if I ever make a Grizzlies video. This seems to be the first of their projects to get finished, and it certainly got people talking. I was going to play it in my personal time, but I figured, hey, it'd be fun to do a little segment on it for this video, so here we are. Firstly, booting up the game, this feels like I'm in a digital elevator. I decided to jump in with everyone set to 0 to check out the place, and despite it being a physically larger area, more densely packed with stuff, I feel trapped. I'm not sure why the simple act of being in this place was way more intimidating than the areas in Help Wanted, but I was already shitting bricks at the thought of doing an actual challenge, and then I got scared by Foxy's bird flying in, so things were off to a great start. This is a very faithful recreation of UCN that keeps everything in the original intact, from characters to challenges to offices, with minor adjustments to some things to better complement the VR experience. For office stuff, the camera's vents and ducts are still on the same monitor, but the options for which is selected along with selecting the what background process is running share their own monitor, and there's also a third one that shows miscellaneous things like power, usage, noise, time, temperature, and coins. There's a flashlight, the mask, and 4 door buttons on the desk, a wet floor sign under it, and your fan is to the right with a button to turn it off. A nice change is you can see any animatronic that's at your door, and the area outside the door lights up when you're looking at the hall's camera. The animatronics are mostly the same, though there are a few that had changes to them. A lot of them are just positioning changes. Nightmare BB sits at the right side under the desk. Rockstar Foxy's bird flies out of the left duct entrance and sits on your monitor for a second. Bonnet comes out of your desk drawer, and Scrap Baby and Rockstar Bonnie show up on your left, which honestly makes Scrap Baby a little harder, since you can't constantly know if she's moved or not. A couple of them got gameplay changes though. Nightmaring and Music Man stand out most. Nightmaring appears depending on if you're looking at them or not, and Music Man now progresses towards you from the left hall based on your noise. There's also a really cool, smart, yet simple workaround for animatronics that appear in your office. If one of them is turned on, occasionally you'll blink and the animatronic shows up. This happens notably with the mask animatronics, since they just pop in randomly in the original game. The mechanic isn't intrusive and is a good way of letting animatronics naturally appear in your office, as well as signaling to the player whether something new has popped up, whether they see it now or not. While we're on the characters, either be it due to how the VR space changes animatronic stalling or slight changes to how animatronics work, some of these guys got a lot easier for me and others got way worse. The balloon kids used to be stalled by you not going into the cameras, and now without that on 20, they're in the vents almost constantly, meaning every second you don't have the vent closed is a chance that they're gonna show up. In a funny turn though, since you get a coin every time you block them, they basically acted as an infinite money hack that extremely simplified the plushie animatronics. Nightmarian used to be the bane of my existence, since having your cursor over them for more than a second was a death sentence, but here you won't even see them if you look directly forward and focus on your desk. Conversely, Nightmare Balloon Boy makes me cry in this version. Even on difficulties below 20, it always seems like he starts looking at me seconds after I look away, and it's much harder to multitask while dealing with him because I can't look at the cameras and the floor at the same time. On top of that, I swear he kills you seconds after looking at you. It's nuts. The mask guys and Scrap Trap also feel like they have more leeway in how quick you are to deal with them, especially Scrap Trap. Even on 20, you still have time to block him after his sound effect ends. Ballora is also slightly easier, since you can see her coming down the hallway, which gives you a little bit more time to react. Originally, I was just gonna mess around here for a little bit, but I was having a lot of fun, so I unlocked all the offices and beat some of the challenges, and I'm happy I did, because I got introduced to some interesting strategies exclusive to this version. The original version of camera stalling ain't happening here, meaning you have to pay attention to the plushie animatronics no matter what now, but there is a different type of stalling you can do here involving Rockstar Chica. If she appears at your door, keeping it closed the whole night prevents her from moving, and animatronics can't get past her. So, if you throw the sign on the right and Gegger on the left and keep that door closed, anyone who comes at you from the left side will be blocked off. This prevents heavy hitters like Music Man, Foxy, and I think Lefty from ever getting at you, which aside from letting you not have to check Pirate's Cove, it also means you don't have to keep an eye on your noise. Power is also a lot more forgiving, which I wasn't expecting since the original game was pretty stingy and now you have the monitors constantly up. But no, with the power generator on, it is extremely easy to have 2 or even 3 doors closed for the whole night, which was unheard of in the original. It's really interesting because the power change makes the game easier, but the whole VR deal having the game be more fast-paced makes the game harder. Usually what this means is that almost everything that happens outside your office is a complete non-issue, trivializing problem characters like the Nightmare Door duo, Freddy, Ballora, and the Plush guys, but also makes characters that used to be easy take their place, like Nightmare BB, Scrap Baby, Nightmare Freddy, and Old Man Consequences. Man, this guy loves shutting down your cameras here. That being said, I liked the shake-up. Not only did it make me change my strategy, but also had me put more thought into what guys would be best to swap in, making a lot of nights go pretty differently from the original. Like, check out the animatronics I chose for the 8,000 points run in the original and in VR. I didn't change a ton of characters, but there are just enough changes to where if I attempted my original set in VR, it'd be a lot harder and vice versa. And yeah, I completed 8,000 points here too, and it was even more intense than the original, but it felt really gratifying to get all the offices here. Still a fan of the FNAF 4 office. FNAF 3 used to be my favorite, but here it makes me a bit too uneasy, especially since they made the spring trap in the background not look super goofy like it used to. And the 5 and 6 room is also cool, I just don't like Bon Bon being on the desk at all times. So yeah, that was a quick look at UCN VR, a really impressive fan project that oozes with passion. Once again, shout out to you, Ro, you really put together something great here. UCN was already one of my favorites, and this adds all the exciting virtual thrill that Help Wanted gave the classic games, with polish and quality that stands toe-to-toe with both the original and the official VR game. It's definitely something I'll come back to just for fun, and who knows, maybe I'll do all the challenges if I really feel like torturing myself playing Chaos 3. This concludes FNAF Help Wanted, its DLC, and Ultimate Custom Night VR while I was on it, and yeah, this is my new favorite game in the series. It is such a beautiful combination of all the things I loved about the original games with its own good, new, and original content sprinkled in. On top of that, while there were some bumps in the road, I do think it had an interesting story to tell, and I do respect it for forging a new path for FNAF stories to head down, giving future games area to expand upon what Help Wanted helped set the groundwork for. And speaking of future games, yeah, the next one is Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach, and man, I have been looking forward to talking about that one, so I hope you'll join me for whenever that one gets done. With that, I hope you enjoyed the video, take care, and I will see you all later.